Welcome to Boston, everybody, for a very special edition of the Harvard Business School Healthcare Alumni Association Virtual Roundtable Series. What we're going to do today is focus on digital surgery, and there's a lot of, you go to meetings, there's lots of good presentations from speakers, you go on LinkedIn and other things, there's good discussions around, what is happening for digital surgery, what that might mean from an employment perspective, from a hiring perspective. What we want to do here is really just focus on, for our audience, which are HBS alums, what are the things that they should be thinking about, and break it into different pieces. One is, okay, if you're a senior person setting strategy for a company, how do I deal with digital surgery and robotics, whatever, in the medical device field? At the other end of the spectrum, if you're an employee, say you're just coming out of HBS, or you're 10 years out of HBS, how do you make sure that you're as valuable as you can be in this world, which is changing, and how big do you need to lean into it, or not, and understand that. And then finally, from a company perspective, what are some of the things? A lot of our alumni are venture investors or PE investors, and they're trying to figure out where they should be spending their money and where they should be putting their efforts, and how do we play that out? And again, it kind of gives some special insights, for lack of a better word, to some of our alumni. So I'm really pleased here today to have some real giants in the field. Joe Mullings is a recruiter, probably the busiest med device recruiter, probably done 7,000 med device placements the last little bit here, 500 different companies, and has really developed a nice situation within the robotics and digital area to kind of be one of the go-to guys for a lot of big businesses, to include companies like Verb and Oris and some others. The other person I want to introduce is Scott Huennekens, who was actually Section B with me, 91B, ooh-ah. So he's a long-time medical device entrepreneur, and has been very much in this area going back to his Berkshire days in terms of just how can the intersection between surgery and mechanical and digital rad kind of become is that much better for patients, and take that forward. And obviously the work that he did with Volcano before selling that to Philips, which has kind of been their big play into being both a see and treat perspective, that he really set the plate for them to be able to execute on that. And then most recently at the J&J Google Verily partnership of Verb Robotics, where he built that whole business, and continues to be a thought leader in this space. So again, we're going to break this down into a couple of different buckets, but maybe first, Scott, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit and kind of what you think about when you think about some of the HBS alumni who'd be listening.
Yeah, so it's funny, last night Peter had arranged a dinner with alumni and students. A number of the current students were asking, how should I be thinking about my career going forward, in the fact that you've got these 30 different technologies, everything from 5G connectivity to AI to big data, and you can use all the different buzzwords, are all happening, and you're getting this 10 times effect, which is occurring, and it's really transformational. So as I look out, if I was graduating, or I'm early in my career, or even I was the middle of my career as I jumped into Google, it's trying to understand what kind of disruption all of those are going to occur, and how can I be a part of it in changing these paradigms. So it's like the things I'm involved in now are robotics, they're diabetes, they're AI and digital plays, they're EP. These are markets that are billion-dollar markets, but are all experiencing 20 to 25% growth rates. So you want to be in front of a big market, and then you say, hey, in addition to the big market, are there technology aspects that I can learn and participate in and bring into the equation from wherever to really accelerate and have a differentiated platform? That's where I get excited, and that's where I've tried to focus my career, over the kind of 3 steps, as Peter and I can attest. We met 30 years ago, almost to the couple of weeks,
exactly.
Showing up to be in our HBS time. So those are some initial thoughts.
That's great. And Joe, so build on that. Obviously, you've seen a lot. You've seen things when I missed it, but you did a great interview with Leon Hirsch, kind of the godfather of laparoscopic surgery. So when Scott talks about surgery 1.0, 2.0, Leon's kind of the godfather of 2.0, right? So as you've seen 2.0 and that evolve and the minimally invasive happen, and now you get into 3.0, and then we'll talk about 4.0. what are some of the things that you think about it? Again, from a potentially an employee perspective in the audience here for our grads.
So Scott nails it. You want to stay in front of the big markets because but they're always the last movers. They'll leverage the technology that comes through the M&A work and the dislocating technology. So if you really look at it, sure, we're going to have, Medtronic is going to show their at 2 o'clock today, their robot up in Hartford. That'll be interesting. And then Leon here, and then Scott actually on the other end of the bookend of creating 4.0. But I think you want to look at it like a Gretzky hockey puck, career hockey puck, is where is it going to be in 4 years, not where is it today. So that's number one. And number two is I break down digital on the robotics side into 4 buckets. You're either in the robotics end, but that robotics is pure physics. There's only so much you can do with a clutch, a brake, a gear, a pulley, and physics is physics. And then you have the imaging side, the navigation side, and then you have the apps side. And I would think about the apps on the back end and the front end of apps, not just apps as we think it on the front end. And I think you should just get in the game. If you're getting out of school, you can't make a wrong move. The wrong move you can make is not getting into a digital, forward-leaning technology. That's where I think you can make the error, because everything's going digital, or it's going to be Amazoned, and it's going to be a commodity. So I would just get in the game if I'm early in, and even midstream. I don't think you could make a mistake right now of leaning really hard into digital.
Yeah, and building on what Joe said there, robotics is only part of it. Joe, we built Verb together. They were our main partner in building out that team on the Google campus. But like Joe said, it was 5 different technology pillars. It was robotics, advanced visualization, and there's a lot of things with navigation and processing and data. Then there's advanced instruments, and you got nanotechnology and different materials. Then you have to have all of those platforms those 3 connected together, and then be able to communicate. So that's this whole connectivity bucket. And then the last one is just the whole digital play of aggregating data and activating the data. So those are the elements of what I talk about when I said everybody's got to move to Medtech 3.0. So, Medtech 2.0 it's about making the device, building some computing power, making different materials into it. But that's just old school. It's the device, it's connectivity, it's data. Those 3 together are Medtech 3.0. Now, when you do that, you open up all kinds of possibilities. Now, vertically at an episode of care, all those devices can start connecting together to other people's. Now you have more data, more insights. Now you can go horizontally across where you can talk about continuum of care. So I totally agree with Joe. Just getting in that mix, even if it's at this one layer of Medtech 3.0 of data and connectivity, that's going to lead to these future plays of stack-ups, on episodes of care or continuum of care, where an Apple Watch leads into an iRhythm patch, which leads into data that feeds into an EP 3.0 world, which we're working on like at Acutus, where there's robotics and there's advanced visualization and mapping to guide therapies to a certain location, and then follow up with monitoring and the like, and you get this virtuous circle that occurs. So I've joked with Joe that I wish I was just graduating from HBS, because I think it's actually the time where there's the most opportunity to create clinical impact, disrupt markets, and globalize markets relative to access.
How does that play out from just from a skill set perspective? Again, people right out of school or even 10 years out of school, the notion of, all right, so I've spent 10 years and I'm a really good brand manager or engineer I've not been assigned any digital stuff yet, or I'm a marketing person, I don't have any engineering degree. How do I make myself credible to be saying I want to be the one who's doing that, as opposed
go back
to...
And I'll ask you a question,
Sure.
using the Socratic method, where we first,
As if you went to HBS or something.
Do you remember what I was going into HBS?
You were an accountant.
I was an accountant, and now I'm a futurist relative to robotics and digital surgery. You got to be a continuous learner, right? And the idea of having one career is just gone. I mean, technology's moving too fast, markets are moving too fast, so you got to be a continuous learner. And we were jokingly talking about building muscle and confusion to build muscle, and I think it's the same way in your career. You've got to challenge yourself, put yourself on teams, even if you're an accountant, be on that team.
I think that's an easy way to get
quality,
that comfort.
Get there, move that direction,
and then
go
and be in. Because again, I'd be curious, Joe, from your perspective, how do people, how do they fake it till they make it? Right? It's the notion of you're saying, hey, you know what, I want to be in this space, and I'm really good at old school marketing, old school whatever, and there's this really important job or interesting job, either in my company or maybe outside, that I want to pitch on. How do I make sure that I come across with credibility without, feeling like I'm going beyond my skis or just
well, the good
talking
news
out
is
loud?
nearly 99% of the population is in that bucket.
Sure.
Because we're so early in that space right now, so that's one. Two is what we've got to, and Scott pointed it out, as an accountant, and I was an engineer. I'm a lifelong engineer though, but still an engineer nonetheless. And you just cannot live under the label that somebody else gave you, right?
Sure,
and because that'll ruin you, right? You inherently know who you are, and break through that. And then realize that your career is not a straight line function. Over the trajectory and the history of the career, you want it to look like this.
Right.
But in reality, it goes like this, right? Yours has, mine has. So you've got to manage it that way. You've got to keep your ego out of the game, because anytime you let ego dictate strategy, you're going to lose in the short term, and then you're going to make some bad moves. So what I would suggest is you have two choices. The big companies are starting to lean into digital, whatever that equation is. And if you're a player in there, whatever you can do, get on that team.
Okay.
And I don't care how you get on, but
I
get
agree.
on that bus. And in the startup world, again, depending on where you are in life, you can take some perceived risks. I would get into a startup company just to get the resume experience, even if it's Bob's or Sally's digitalplay.com.
Okay.
Get in there. And again, that knowing that you're playing long ball there, but just get in the game and don't get hung up on what your peers are doing, because they're all afraid because they don't have the answer. And I think the big players know the least amount about digital strategy in relative terms to the startups, because the startups are bringing in non-medtech people who already have been playing in a digital landscape for a long time. Medtech is trying to relearn that, right? The 60 to 70-year-old people who are in that executive row have no clue in relative terms to the people walking into it now.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. And I said before, get in front of big markets, but the second and third things are, get in a company where you can be on teams, you can be given responsibility in these areas. Some companies are very, very tightly managed and aren't as flexible relative to that. So around those teams and those cultures that do that. And then mentors, people that are knowledgeable in the space. So as they grow in there, you get kind of pulled along as you deliver. So to Joe's point, I graduated from HBS. Everyone's taking jobs at McKinsey and banking. I went to a small, B deal medical device company, Berkshire Medical Systems in Irvine, making $44,000 a year. My wife graduated law school, making 4 times as much as me.
Brains of the outfit.
That was great.
She's still the brains of the outfit.
She is still the brains of the outfit and the like. But you make that investment. It was kind of like a second MBA. Get into a B deal, which then became quickly moved over to Edwards, a leader in cardiovascular surgery at that time, moving into different areas. That's an A list. Now you're building that credibility, which allows you to do the next thing and the next thing. And the same thing plays out today. It's no different. Get into a good deal, as good a deal as you can, in one of these areas, play it forward into the next, and you're kind of on your way.
Someone asked a question I was going to ask, is like, what about from an individual company perspective, which are the best to go into? Because one of the things that there was I'm not sure you had a chance to listen to it, but last week one of the HBS alumni VRTs was with Fred Hassan, who was the longtime CEO of Pharmacia, kind of bought Keytruda for that business. Is really giant. So talk about people in their 60s and 70s. It was really, they actually had a lot to offer in their discussion around, because the thing was, how do you manage into the digital age, right? And a couple of things they talked about were, in terms of companies, it was about trust, it was about mentorship, it was about the notion of what you're doing in that company. So within the different types of, maybe your view on this compared to Scott's, within the different types of, if you lined up 5 companies, not from a technical or brand perspective, but just from how they run themselves or things to think about, are any things to, choose to do or try to stay away from? Again, because I'm sure you've worked a lot of them and hired against a lot of them as well.
Yeah, I've worked both sides. I've been fortunate to do so. So look, let's call out some companies here on a positive note. So J&J, we can look at that, and this is public knowledge, so I'm not. So when J&J and Google were building Verb, they went to Cincinnati and they said, who here wants to move out to the Bay Area? You've never worked on robots before, but we need some really good people to engage with the roboticists and the controls engineers and the manufacturing people, who wants to move their life out there? And hands went up.
Yep.
And those individuals made very sage decisions. It might have been uncomfortable in their life. So like J&J is one of those organizations I respect, and I think they're all in on robots. When you drop that money on Oris, and to me it's just, I think it's Q1, they buy Verb, just makes sense, right? I'll go out on the limb there, it just makes a lot of sense. And they put their shoe on the back of Medtronic, and Medtronic is answering today. And so I think you have these companies like Cambridge Medical Robotics, these lower tier organizations in relative terms to sales and overall that I would lean into. So CMR, I would go after CMR. I would move to London, England, right? I would go for those companies that now have a high fidelity signal in the digital robotics world, meaning specialization in imaging, specialization in navigation, specialization in apps. But those are going to be startups. So you go where they're spending the money. J&J's spending the money. Get on that bus. Take a lateral, take a cut. You know, that's an example of how I would reverse engineer that. And then be brave enough to go to a startup, because these startups, Scott will tell you, they can't boil the ocean when they're developing a robot. They've got to put all their resources at Gen 1. So they've got to bring in these outside technologies eventually.
So that's a good chance. So let's pivot to the other piece of the audience, another piece of the audience, which is the investors, say PE guys, maybe BD guys, people in venture capitalists. You know, what are some of the things that, and there's 100 plus companies out there, right, robots. So what are some of the things that is going to dictate which are the survivors and which are, you know, maybe they get bought out, but they get bought out successfully, and others which just kind of die on the vine or whatever. I don't know if you have any take on, again, it's a pretty broad question, but the type of things that if you were giving advice to a venture investor or someone that they might be the companies that'll have legs.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's one I've delved into here, leaving Verb and now saying I want to work on 6 or 7 companies, board level, investor, advisor. So you're trying to pick the winners. And so I look again, big market, empty space for the play. You're not the 5th robotics company, or you're not the 5th. I don't even think about it as robotics. I think about it as the clinical solution. And I think looking at it, that would be the first thing. Looking at it as just robotics, I think is wrong. You have to think about the solution I'm bringing that involves those technology pillars that I talked about. If you can fill a technology pillar that then Stryker needs to buy or J&J, that's okay, but it's dangerous because if they buy someone else, the hole's filled, and you don't have a total solution. And so you saw that in stents, like J&J buys Connor. That was the last one bought. There were 12 other stent companies. They all died. So robotics or digital AI or each of these segments are a little bit like that. So you want to be one of the first 2 or 3. You want to have clinical significance. You know, you got to do your Michael Porter 5 forces that J&J doesn't, you know, they also have instruments and visualization and open and lap instruments that they can bundle, and you could have the best robot, but the product isn't the robot, the product's the whole solution. So I used to joke, like at Volcano, hey, Lotus 123 may have a better spreadsheet than Excel, but the product's not Excel anymore. Yeah. The product is Microsoft Office, so you got to have all the elements of Microsoft Office. So when you're looking at these deals, I think you have to be saying, hey, and it's probably going to take twice as long, cost twice as much. So the capital allocation, these are big, expensive plays. I mean, Verb, Medtronic, et cetera. CMR just raised, what, $250+ million? Right? I mean, these are $500+ million investments to get to market. So you better have a pretty good idea that you can win with that value proposition.
I want to jump on that, and I'm going to step back even further and broaden that aperture. I think we're going to see a different class of investors coming out. Scott is exactly right when you look at the point of care, but I think you're going to have a class of investors come out that'll be entering this market, and they're technologists. They haven't sold medical devices, and they're not going to worry about a clinical lift. They're not going to worry about an approval. What they're going to do is they're going to come out with the technologies that offer, again, that higher fidelity asset that these big players are going to have to acquire. So you're going to have a smaller investment. You're going to have a quicker path to exit. They're going to be pure technology plays. Yeah. I'm not going to need a lot of knowledge about clinical landscape. I'm not going to have Scott on my board or part of my fund as one of the mainstays. I'm just going to need to understand, how do I see the unseen with a vision system? How do I navigate with another technology? How do I create an app? Here's an example. New product out, new platform coming out, Bright Insights. Beautiful. So they've spun out of Flex, the contract manufacturer, and they're creating they call it a cloud. I think they're making a mistake. They should call it the sky, bigger than the cloud.
That's cool.
Right? And why would I want to manage something I'm not good at if I'm a large strategic, meaning the entire IoT landscape? I've got patient records, I've got cybersecurity, I've got all these things. It's not my core competency. I would want to be an investor in a Bright Insight and bring that platform to the market. I don't have a solar farm in my backyard when I want electricity in my house. Right? I don't have a water wheel, I have a utility. And I think you're going to see different class of investors coming out surrounding medtech, and it's going to be a different mentality. I think family offices and private money are going to really start to bring in other avenues. And then one other thing, I think you're going to see medtech, justifiably so, finally get valuations based the way biotech does, on future value, more than ever before. And it's going to change financing. I think you're going to see revenue share on tech development.
Yeah, I think that.
Okay, I think you're going to see that slide in. I think you're going to see somebody go, that's a great product, we'll come in, we'll invest, and we'll give you a revenue share, so you don't have to necessarily look. So these are all where I think the investment landscape is going to change.
Yeah, it's kind of like iconic, right? That notion of both the family office and very tech, Datadog.
Because you can turn that investment in
like
18 to 24 months, and you're not waiting for an 8-year high-risk clinical lift on a PMA.
You don't need all that clinical stuff.
Yet, every robotic
need that
company
people need,
is going to need those high-fidelity assets in their portfolio.
Getting back to your point about clinical, how narrow or broad can that clinical benefit be? Right, 'cause I know sometimes we talk about surgery 4.0, we're talking about the railroad and then individual solutions along there. Where are we on that?
I think there's multiple targets. I mean, I look at it and say, hey, surgery 3.0 is kind of peaked relative to cost, access, or outcomes. You need to get on that next curve of 4.0, because we have 2.5 billion people that have access to surgery. We have 5 billion people that don't. Well, how do you get all 5? Then it's going to take technology, it's going to take 5G, it's things like the recent purchase that was just made by Siemens of Corindus. Those kinds of creating access is a different point. That's a clinical benefit. It's not just, oh, my stent is 20% better than your stent. There's going to be some different metrics. It's creating the ability to disrupt the way that the services are provided. So the things that Joe mentioned, building the equivalent of an Android layer, building a cloud. You look at what Viva has done in pharmaceuticals, they're a SaaS solution. And $1 billion in revenue, $25 billion market cap, where they're allowing a pharma company to activate their sales force or their internal metrics in a different way. And a lot of these things, whether it was Auris, and you look who invested there, people like Peter Thiel and the like. You look at Digital Surgery, which is an AI company in London, we're 8VC and the investors from Palantir. You're getting these tech investors coming up, but they're looking, SoftBank, looking at a lot of big things with their Vision Fund too. They're looking at big bets where you can create billion-dollar companies, and this is about disrupting entire markets that may layer over an individual device. So it's back to that Medtech 3.0, where they go, I don't care if there's a bunch of undifferentiated products down here. I'm going to have the connectivity and the data, and then I'm going to link a bunch of them together, and that's where going to be the value chain is owned. And
you go a differentiated utility that has to be used,
medical device companies, you go make all. Look, I mean, Apple sits there and collects 20-30% from the Ubers and the Airbnbs and everybody else who have a differentiated platform, and service revenue is greater. Someone's going to do those kinds of things are going to get developed. Viva's an example in pharma where that can scale. There'll be similar things play out in medical devices, I believe. And we'll see what Cerner and Epic do to activate into that regard as well.
I love your challenge to Cerner and Epic in terms of can they do anything but be stuck in this antiquated space.
Right, because they're collecting
and
the data.
Very important everyday water, talk about utilities, but it's just, old brass pipes.
That's why it's a fascinating time, strategy-wise.
Whatever. Yeah. So broaden a little bit from a, again, career perspective. What about some of the less surgical areas in terms of the pre-op or other digital stuff, Achille and digital therapeutics? What's your take? Again, for this audience, look at it from an employee perspective, moving back and forth between those fields potentially, and also maybe from an investor's perspective. What gets you excited about that? And then what things might kind of scare you to say, hey, let's be worried about that?
It's interesting. I think the undervalued beachfront property right now is patient monitoring.
Is what?
Patient monitoring.
Patient monitoring.
I think it's the undervalued. Organizations were actually purging their platforms of that because they weren't getting the return they wanted. We watched Edwards getting rid of a lot of their things, and tech was never really pushed there. And I think predictive analytics is really the backdoor to the value of patient monitoring. So if I have a footprint in an ICU or a CCU setting, or in an OR, and I already have that box there, I have a choice, right? I can either bring in a brand new mindset and add a predictive analytics component to that, and add a level of intelligence to the engagement with the patient, right? Take that analog signal from the patient, digitize it, and then punch it up to a cloud. Robots are fighting to get into these ORs. Patient monitoring already has the beachfront property. It just needs to be cleaned up and modernized. So I'm super excited about that space, especially. That is a sleeping giant, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's this way, right? Back to my example. That's the
continuum
of care.
All the way back to wearables to
it's wearables
hospice
all the way
care,
through
whatever
to,
that
to
range
Massimo
is.
and they're doing some cool stuff, Joe. You should talk to Joe Chiani and those guys. And then post, and that integrates with the therapy companies as well to optimize the right thing, and it allows the personalized medicine aspect to activate. I think there are business challenges relative to the way the reimbursement system works for getting paid for these different things when you're that and not attached to a therapy.
What are you finding from a personnel perspective? Because again, I think sometimes, I know we kind of like group of digital people as kind of, it doesn't matter if we're doing a wearable or in the middle of a robot, they're all kind of digital. When you think about it realistically, it's not really the same other than the fact that it's not metal and plastic, right?
No, I mean, I'll give you a case example of it being interesting. Like in San Diego, like you take all the stuff with continuous glucose monitoring, but you got Qualcomm right there. So if you're building tandem diabetes and with Dexcom, and it's a whole different mindset. You got to build a cloud platform. You got to build connectivity. They're pulling engineers from Qualcomm onto their teams. They're building out data scientists, data analytics. People are having to look for analogs in other industries to bring into medical devices. And that's what I would challenge people that are listening here, whether you're beginning your career 10 years, it's like, what's the analog of a different business model that's worked very well that I can now apply to disrupt what's going on?
Okay. And the case study method is meant to teach you how to do that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But on that point with Scott, you asked what I'm afraid of. What I'm afraid of is the legacy thinking of leadership in medtech of, we don't pay our software engineers that much money.
Yeah.
All right, so when you start to bring in software engineers from outside medtech, they're bringing in skills that are incredibly unique and highly valued within, and they become force multipliers. Right? So a software engineer is not a software engineer, yet we put those salary bands there. So when I lean into, let's use it as a controls engineer in the Bay Area, and my client says, we've got 180, 25% bonus and no equity because I'm a publicly traded company and it's not high enough. And I want you to go get the best of the best. And I have to go lean into Google or Tesla or Facebook or LinkedIn. And they're making $600,000-$700,000. And they do want to come change the world. They're tired of keeping grandma on a browser for 14 more seconds watching a kiddie video. But it's hard to come home and take a 50% cut in pay. But leadership is not caught up yet and said, although Scotty, you did that, and you did it at Verb, Scott did it, broke out a separate component and said, these skill sets are so critical to our organization, we're going to fall outside that. And all it is creating an awareness that we've got to get out of that legacy thinking of bands and salaries and titles, defined skill sets. That scares me.
We just said, hey, these are check jobs where we're competing against tech companies. These are med tech jobs, and we had bands for both, and it allowed you to go be aggressive and find the right people. And you're right, you didn't have to meet Tesla, and you didn't have to meet all the auto driving programs and Google and everything else. You could be within shouting distance, and the people wanted to come over and work changing
be
the world.
credible that they're getting
Be
credit
credible,
for it.
absolutely.
So along that line, so what are some other things that you've seen or advice you'd have for hiring managers? Again, a lot of our, a lot of alumni, they're in a situation where they're X point, they've got responsibility for some digital, some non-digital stuff. They're not digital native. They may have some people on the team. What are some advices for things to do and not do when they go to, number one, develop an organization, and number two, hire? On developing an organization is like, do I put everybody together, or do I have a little bit spread throughout all my businesses? And how do you get that trade-off of dying on the vine as 1 out of 10 versus they're all together? And so what are your take on that? And I'll ask you, Scott, the same kind of question.
So I think the first thing we've got to get over, again, as I come back to it, I use it a lot in talent acquisition, is legacy thinking. Is first of all, don't base your entire yay or nay on the resume, especially in the Bay Area. You're 18 months average stay there if you're a software engineer, and that's what you want to happen. Double E software, mechanical, and even if it was Open Zipper, Iowa, you should still accept that. Because the people who are pursuing tech, aggressively.
I'm sorry, where in Iowa was that?
Open Zipper.
Open Zipper.
Open Zipper, Iowa. It's a fine town. And so, the people who are pursuing this tech, you can reference check instability, emotional instability, bad teammate, etc. But I see too many hiring managers pass on a resume at immediately first glance, even though the individual has some great reasons, great insight. So that's number one. And I would say number two is test early for technical skills. And if you don't have those technical skills in-house, have the organization help you in finding either a board member, but testing early on tech skills is important, because what I've seen happen is non-digital companies, non-digital hiring managers hiring digital people make the wrong decision. You get downrange 6-9 months, you've got some real remediation issues that are beyond scale of screwing up tooling on an extruded catheter.
Yeah.
So I would make sure that you test early and often, and that you make sure that you have somebody who's got a lot of exposure to a lot of tech and reference check the heck out of them for emotional stability in an environment. So you have to make sure you investigate the environment that you base emotional stability from.
And so you're implying that emotional stability is especially important in this
Relevant
type
to
of
environment. Relative to environment.
Yeah, but I mean, for that type of organization within a standard organization where you're going to have more dynamics because it's a new thing.
And somebody
and
who's
it's extra important, but also extra new.
And somebody who's interested and welcomes having their work attacked. Okay. Not their person attacked, but their work attacked. Because when you're going after a digital platform, there are so many components to that in aggregate. And you have a lot of stakeholders. And we get these PhDs out of unbelievable programs. But what they've done is they've coded themselves, and a couple advisors have looked at it, and they've never had to defend under duress in a commercial environment their work. And when you take that person and you transfer them over to a commercial environment where you need to blow holes in things, and that's part of the process, that emotional maturity you cannot gain for 2, 3, 4 years until you've gone through that.
At that line level. And also, as we know, with Theranos, you can't just fake it till you make it. You've got to challenge
you
and
fake it till you get caught with Theranos. That's
right?
different,
So
yeah.
There's two things that come to mind for me that I think we did well together, Joe and I, at Verb. And this isn't meant to be a commercial for Joe, but number one is, building a function relative to attracting talent that has the experience to identify and ferret out great. So I'm not a data scientist. I don't have a lot of experience in data science or robotics control. Go hire a firm that's done that and done that very well so that they can help you. Then find partners. So for us, it was Google. We'd have Google run their hiring practice and got them to agree, have their HR people and software engineers do the interviewing process to find, because there are these 10 times effect software engineers, and the same thing with the data scientist side of things. The other main thing is hire great leaders. So having a great leader of R&D, we had a guy, Dave Scott, who was our COO, done this before at Intuitive, had the robotics experience, had the software experience. So then he could attract great leaders under him who knew they would learn from Dave. So it creates an attraction methodology, but also Dave could see real versus not real. So you don't end up 6 months down the road where, hey, someone did this, or so we built a team of people who'd done robotics before at various companies very well. Part of that was Joe knew some of these people, Dave and I knew, and it all kind of worked. It worked together. Knowing what you don't know, filling that with experience of people that do, worked very effectively.
Yeah, agreed.
So what would be some advice for some senior managers who are looking to hire, say they're, again, they haven't yet, made a big play into digital. Again, I don't know, like the Danaher spin-out you just took public, how, obviously the 3D printing, how, digital they are.
Yeah, pretty limited.
Pretty limited, right? So if you're gonna say, I'm gonna hire a leader for that organization to be doing that, would you lean toward the same question I asked Fred Hassan last week? You're going to hire someone who's a pharma native speaker or a digital native speaker to help build that major capability that needs to, know what's going on in the new space, but then also plug in and be effective. I don't know how you think about.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the preference is someone who has domain experience, who also has the tech experience, and someone who's also a very curious person who's a lifetime learner. And so you're generally not going to find all three when technology's moving this fast and markets are being disrupted. So I would sacrifice probably a little bit on that middle bucket, but knowing the domain experience and being a good generalist with a proven track record of leading, innovating. If you innovate in other areas, you can innovate in this area. You just have to be that curious learner, and you build out the talent around you for the middle bucket has been my experience.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. So the first thing I would say is, and we've seen other tech companies, mad respect for Apple, mad respect for Google, they have historically had a really hard time on the regulatory FDA side. They're great technologists. Yeah. So my Sherpa would be understanding the reg, clin, qual framework first. And then I would go for domain knowledge, because I've got to understand what my user wants. I think this is where you're going to start to get the fallout, and there's a number of robotic companies right now who are entering that second inning that did not pay attention to the user. They thought building a robot for the tech of the robot was going to get them over the line. And then what they underclubbed was that cognitive load on the surgeon. They built a great technology, but they didn't have enough elbow time, belly-to-belly time with the clinicians and the work teams. And so that cognitive load on the doc was, they're just going to revert back to manual surgery. And I just had this happen with, we're going to be at NAS tomorrow, a big ortho player who I think dominates the spine space, and they have a great robot, I think best in class, just released their second rev. And they said the surgeons who have been customers of theirs came out of the lab and like, man, I feel like I can do 10 more surgeries. Because they're paying attention now to that UI, UX interface. And so I think having that clinical reg and understanding what that interface with this digital solution is hypercritical to workflow. Because you can always hire digital experts, architects, but you can't position the strategy unless you've lived in that domain with the user.
So how does that play out? It reminds me of a discussion we had last year at the HBS conference on the CEO panel we did. And it was a little bit about your first CEO. Do you really expect that CEO to last, the company used to take 7 years to get 510K clearance. Should they expect to make it all the way through? Are they the right person by the time they get to the end of that path? Do you see some of that same thing here in terms of the CEOs at these tech startups? Or
personally,
not so
what
much?
I see is there's going to be a really clumsy time right now in medtech, and there's a number of companies experiencing it right now. They've dominated their space in spine, or in general surgery, or in neuro, and they are trying to convert now to a digital strategy. And that's a cultural shift that is, I think, seismic. And I'll use an example, and I think they did it brilliantly. I think Globus is a really good example. So Globus Medical, very strong spine ortho player. They started their robotic program, not in Pennsylvania, here in Methuen, up in Boston. They hired Norbert Johnson, And they let Norbert build his team up there away from the culture, the mindset, the quality system, the legacy thinking of making a medical device, and allowed him to build a robotic system. And so I'm watching a lot of players now, big players, billion-dollar players, struggle with decision making on hiring the right people because they're used to making implants and mechanical devices and are not understanding enough of what that new culture needs to look like.
So how, it kind of ties to the question about sometimes companies, they do an acquisition to help get into that. If I forget it, Globus, they bought Nick Theodore's company, right?
Well,
so is that separate? Or how,
they
forget
bought
about
a
that
Genesis
piece.
technology,
Okay,
yeah.
so let's forget about it. But how does that play out in terms of trying to use an infusion of a company into a bigger company as a graft to kind of to get that, to turn that wheel? Is that what's going to make that work more often than not? I mean, what are some things to watch out on that type of strategy?
Yeah, so I think what I would do,
level type of
I would look
discussion,
at
or senior
partnering.
management.
There's no way that you can have, at the velocity that the market's growing right now, right? And you've got that classic S-curve that Scott refers to, right? You've got the birth, the adoption, the early adopters, the maturity, and then saturation. And right now we're in early innings in medtech, and robotics and medtech, but you've got to be on that train, because there's going to be people who are just going to grab that land grab. And so I think you've got to get partners. And I think what you've got to do is allow those partners to own that. Not only own it when you like the decision, but own it. And that means bring a KUKA in and build your robot, right? And they're experts in robotics,
they're great.
but they're not good in medical device.
Right.
And you're a great X, you're a restoration robotics, you do great, right, implants, and you know the clinical setting and you're dealing with. And then you've got to bring in a bright insight. So I think we're moving into a very interesting time in medtech where true partnership, collaboration, and co-ownership, and eventually revenue sharing is going to dynamically change across the board.
Yeah, you've got to know this is where things are going. We are going to this MedTech 3.0 world. It's
I got to
happening.
tell you, I was thinking about,
It's
you
happening.
go back to 2005, within Depew, I was part of our sports medicine business, kind of watching our recon business, people like Kevin Saito. We were spending $20 million a year for our computer, aided surgery program from 05 to 07 08. We thought that was going to be the thing.
Yeah.
But it was too
You were
early.
early.
It was too early, and that hurt the rest of our
but
pipeline
now-
because we didn't invest in some metal and plastic stuff we should have. But it's
So
clear
I'm
now
not
what's going
saying
to happen.
you have to, look, if you've got a strategic business like Ethicon Endosurgery, that's a $6-7 billion franchise, or Medtronic, you've got to protect that.
Sure.
So you're doing the things. Basically, what Globus did is what J&J did with creating Verb. You've got to have a play. You've got to start building some muscle in your organization to understand. That muscle that we were developing there at Verb was getting populated throughout J&J. So now over in the EP Bioscience franchise, they start talking about digital surgery. In the orthopedics franchise, the word digital surgery becomes part of the vernacular and the culture that's J&J, with a partnership with Google and then other partnerships and some small acquisitions, the CSATs and this or that. You start building a capability set. You're not having to do it all at one time, but you're building it over time and learning as you go. I still, even here this week at this meeting, I've been talking with different senior leaders in this industry, and I'm talking about APIs, and they don't know what an API is. And so there's an evolution that has to take place among senior leadership in this industry. Otherwise, we're going to be stalled relative to the progress that we can make. But I just think.
And then for our audience, tell everybody what API is.
No, I'm not going to. They have to look it up.
Look it up.
If they don't know, they all know.
They know. To be fair, if they're watching us, they know. Let's do a quick fire couple questions.
Yeah.
So, you've interviewed a lot of folks. I know you've done a good job mentoring people like Santosh, who's an MBA, HBS guy. What are some of the mistakes that an HBS or some MBA might make as you've seen, just in general, not necessarily just for digital, over your years, in terms of things that do them well versus things that you really know what, that kind of
Yeah, I don't want to be a shill for HBS, but HBS sets a mindset of I'll work for free just to get the experience, and I'll pick best in class. So it really does a great job at that. And the HBS, like Santosh, will just go and be bold and go work for free at best in class. So they do that
virtually free,
pretty much for free, right? There's some times that I would say pay somebody to work in certain companies. So I think that's what they do well. And And I think the things that you have to be careful coming out is you need to move away from where you grew up. I think you need to go out on your own. I think you've got to take on 3 or 4 major lifts of adversity. I think you need to get into a startup after you come out and work in a large corporation. So if I had my little brother, I'd say go work at a large J&J and find out what process looks like.
Okay.
Don't think it's the best process, but get a good scale across the board to see what process looks like. Then immediately get into a well thought out startup and expect to spend 2 years there. Don't care how much stock they give you. Do not, because you're not going to cash it in. If you do, it's a bonus early in your career, right?
Right.
And then what I would do is I would take inventory, get 3 or 4 advisors, and again, HBS has that resource available. That would be my path the first 4 to 5 years out of school.
So what about for you, Scott? You've seen a lot of people ask advice. What are some mistakes that people make?
Yeah, the thing I would add on, I've always tried, maybe it was ingrained in me at HBS, I always kind of start with what's the goal that you're looking to do. So often people will come to ask for mentoring and happy to provide it, and I'll say, but what's your goal? And it's, hey, well, I want to be a business unit leader at some point in time. They don't have any specificity. I don't want to be a business unit leader 10 years, 50. I want to be a CEO. It's okay to say, I want to be a CEO. It's almost like at times people are apologetic about that. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's right for you. What do you want? What industry do you want to work in? What do you enjoy doing? Then you can build a plan towards the goal. So I can never answer the question of what I would do unless I understand what the goal is. So to answer your question, assuming someone is looking to make the biggest difference they can in the medtech world and be a business unit leader and be a CEO, I tend to agree with Joe. I went to a small medical device company to start with. Very quickly learned after a year or two, I didn't know what great looked like. And they weren't going to teach me, and I needed to go work at a Baxter, in which I worked in the Edwards division. And like Joe said, I got to see 5 different divisions, cardiology. Cardiology, there was only one market, there was $1 billion. I knew there were going to be 10, so I'm like getting in front of that wave where all boats rise. There's going to be opportunity for me. I knew I could perform and be good. That would create opportunities. But then I started, producing a 5-year, plan. Just like, you produce your 5-year plan for your business across all aspects, whether it's family, financial goals, physical goals, development goals, and, measure myself, quarterly. So I try and I always share with people I mentor my rolling 5-year plan and assessment. But it starts with what's that goal? And I like the idea of going into a bigger company, learn, then going out. And if that's what you want to do, if you want to be the CEO of Medtronic and move every year, or every 2 years, that's fine too. At Baxter, I started having to move, and I said, I want to live one place. I'd rather build. I remember having this conversation with the CEO of Baxter at the time. He's like, you're in one of our 5 people to be the future CEO of Baxter in this age category. We just don't lose people. And I said, I don't want to be the CEO of Baxter. I want to build 6 companies to sell to Baxter. And we laughed about that, and that's kind of what I've been trying to do. But that's what the goal is. Whereas you've had a very successful career building, through a J&J, which was different goals. And neither one's right or wrong. Both what we wanted to do. You were trained in the Army to listen to authority. I have trouble with authority.
You grew up with,
I don't like people telling me what to do.
You grew up outside of LA where you just do what you want. You're good, right? So that's all where we come from, right?
Yeah, who we are.
Very good. So when you think of, we're going to wrap up pretty soon here. I think they just broke from the lunch. So just real quickly, for Scott, what is the thing when you hear different senior leaders ask for, you hear them talking about their business? 2 questions. When you hear them talk about their business, what are some of the mistakes they're making, or things that they're either overemphasizing or underemphasizing when they're thinking about how they need to take on their business?
Yeah, I think in general people are overly tactical and too worried about this quarter, this year, and I try and encourage people to think in terms of that you got to execute your plan and under promise and over deliver, but you also got to be able to be making the investments so that you're not disrupted and you're successful over 5 years, which then also leads to this people bucket.
Right.
And are you developing the culture, and are you developing the people that can help you do both of those very well. So they'll often say, I can't change this person, even though I know they're not going to get me to this 5-year plan because I got to make this plan. And I don't know how many times I've heard people say, and Joe probably is going to reiterate, it's like when they all wish they would have made the decision earlier to change someone when they knew they weren't right. And so I see that mistake a lot.
Yeah. So related to that, I'm sure you've seen a lot of venture pitches, standard companies as well as on the digital side. What are the things that if you're pitching a digital company versus a regular medical device implant company or whatever, that people need to change or they make the mistake of not adjusting for, or is there nothing like that? It's really a good business plan and a good pitch is going to be a good pitch.
Yeah, I think people are overly optimistic, and you need to be overly optimistic. When I look back at all the startups I've been involved in and done, if you knew everything that you'd have to overcome, you never would have started the business.
Sure.
So part of that is just you need that youthful enthusiasm of a startup to believe and you got to just figure it out. One of my favorite sayings is, "There's no bumps in the road. That is the road." But I would say the answer to your question is, do not ignore the bumps. You got to have a radar to be aggregating and building a culture of transparency to get all of those so you can solve them. And look, you don't have to solve all of them. Some of them are serious, and being able to basically differentiate what's an above the waterline hole in the boat and what's a below the waterline hole in the boat that sinks you. You got to focus your attention there. I see people often just going, I got 8 things to solve, and they're trying to solve all 8 when they really need to solve 2, because they can wait on those other ones and figure out what's important to begin with.
Yeah, I want to jump on that one too a little bit, and the guidance I would give to 2 out or even CEOs is learn to live a life of approximation and precision as you're making your decisions. There are certain decisions you have to make that you have to be perfect. Balance sheets, engineering, science.
Yeah.
And you can get wrapped around the axle on that mindset as you shift over to
Good point.
needing to live in a world of approximation. Good enough is good enough because this is not our destination. And so I see a lot of leaders who tend to index towards CTO mentality, who are CEOs, that they use perfection as an excuse for delay. And then I see sales and marketing types who tend to use approximation in their
excuses,
in
right?
their accounting.
Right. And so I think the advice I would give to anybody is be able to live your life where it is appropriate, not where it's comfortable, where approximation decision making and perfect decision making is appropriate. And that's what I would say. Yeah.
And so from an HR management perspective, so that's obviously, sometimes you've been hired directly into work. What is some advice for leaders who have HR teams, to give advice to the HR team on how to live into this world and be smart, where they're balancing keeping both native tongues and stuff like that? And any thoughts for those?
Yeah, so I like to stay in my swim lane. I'm not an HR guy. Anybody who knows me, I'm the first violator of HR.
Yeah.
Scotty can tell you that.
Yeah.
But talent acquisition.
That's what I meant. Talent acquisition.
Talent acquisition is not HR, and it's funny you said that, because they're 2 different skills. Somewhere about 60 years ago, nobody wanted to handle that stuff, so they threw it into one bucket. And one is a hunter mentality, and one is a farmer.
So they say within the talent acquisition department within a company, what advice would you have for them and/or the manager, general manager of the team, who's trying to hire a team and they're not going directly out to people like you, but they need to manage their own TA team, and that TA team has been used to doing this stuff for a long time, and now you've got this new funky stuff and it's sexy, so they're really excited about it, but maybe they get overexcited because it's so sexy.
You got to start to tell a narrative in the marketplace around your company and your mission, and you have to tell that often and long. And it's a 6-month, 1-year program. It's not a product narrative, but a hiring narrative of what you're trying to change, why you're doing it, that revolves around 4 pillars: the market that you're in and why it makes sense for the future, the product and how it addresses that market, the leadership, who else has jumped on that rocket, and then why are you doing it? And I think CEOs, quite honestly, the board should hold CEOs accountable for the hiring brand of their organization if they really wanted better outcomes. And I think they should be graded on that as effectively as depending on what the other KPIs are being engaged on.
That's really, I love that notion you talk. I've heard you say before of the notion of, when you're a startup, you should be getting the message out there such that when that regulatory VP you need to be hired 6 months from now, you're starting to hire for them, that brand is already out there in such a way that,
absolutely.
Gee, I would want to be the regulatory guy for that guy.
I was
who's
waiting
now
for
just
that
a product.
role to open. I've been watching your company.
And so building on that from a framework standpoint, one of my favorite books is this book, Barbarians to Bureaucrats, where these companies start out in this barbaric phase, and then they into this growth phase, synergist phase, then they go over to bureaucratic, aristocratic, and it's this curve that you go through, and the people, process, and systems are different depending on which phase you're in. So when you're, and the cultures are different across there. So when Joe's recruiting the first 10 people at Verb, it's different than when we're at 500.
Right.
And now we have some process in place. These people have to be a little more, aggressive, comfortable with more ambiguity, need to put things in place. These people are a different phase. This is a different phase. So I'd say when you're doing your talent acquisition, you got to be building into what phase you're in, what's your culture of where you're at, to match those to get most effectiveness. And then you got to do things that reinforce it. So Joe, being the bad HR guy he was, he did a couple of things that irked J&J a little bit because he was a little
tattoos.
he was a little aggressive. We celebrated those at Verb because our culture was I am Verb, under the B in Verb was bold. And Joe was being bold. So we're not going to knock Joe for being bold. We're going to celebrate it. We're going to say we need to dial it back a little bit, but we named our monthly award after one of his gaffes, which it made
awesome.
we were reinforcing to people what we want. We want you to be bold. We want you to make decisions. We don't want you to have to ask. And those are the elements.
So
that you
one
need to
last
drive.
question for each of you.
Yeah.
This is targeted to another audience. There are the HBS professors and researchers. What should they be studying and researching? What would you want them to be doing case studies on? What do you think would be interesting for them to do case studies on? There are a lot of people interested in getting into health tech or healthcare at HBS. Give them some guidance on where they should be thinking. Dora Stern or some of these people who are really doing good work.
If you're in digital, I would hit up the university to send me to the top 4 or 5 industry shows every year. And I would walk the floor and I would announce that I was going to be there as an HBS professor, and I would ask to meet each of the technologists at each of the booths. And I would walk around, and then I would take that sort of university mindset and then put it right into the commercial, because I think that professor, or any teacher for that matter, will represent content different now that they've stepped into that market. And they'll hear language, and they'll understand tech, and just by nature, any professor, but especially an HBS professor, is going to be naturally curious. And what that will do will be a catalyst for them to dig deeper. So that would be the number one thing.
What kind of 4 or 5?
So I would go to the robotics heavy if we're doing digital right now. So I would be at NAS. I would be at Sages, right?
So what I would say is, if they're already in healthcare and evaluated from a payer, provider, supplier standpoint and have a pretty good feel for all those industry dynamics, I think that reinforces. But I'd send them to
Healthapalooza.
Yes, Burning Man, whatever it is, these different tech conferences to say, hey, what's happening over here that ports over to here to disrupt this model? Because healthcare is broken. Spending 18% of GDP, having all these costs and administrative costs, it's just not. We can do better. And so how do I apply tech and all of this? These 30 things I opened with that are going through 10 times effects. And that's what Google's trying to do with Verily. They're saying, how can I do that and apply these to change and improve access, outcomes, and costs?
Which is, again, I've got a chance to listen to Dean Noria's Leadership Day earlier this month. And that part of that notion is like, how do we use HBS to take advantage of this? And how do we make sure that all these new medicines can be, continue to be amazingly, effective, but then also, available and widely done.
Right.
So thanks a lot, guy. We're going to probably wrap up
so
now.
Appreciate it.
And just for the audience, if you're not familiar, we're probably going to post this pretty broadly. We do these virtual roundtables, often kind of a WebEx. We're not doing WebEx here today because we're live, kind of like Saturday morning football game or something like that. But it's available on a real regular basis. Definitely shout out to our HBS conference, November 7th and 8th, Thursday and Friday at the Charles Hotel in November. Going to be a great meeting. People like Paul Stoffels, Amy Edmondson, Julie Rubenstein, who just went public with Adaptive Biotherapeutics. So really good show. And just you become a member, you basically have access to free for all of these. And if you know somebody who's an HBS person and you're not an HBS person, you can always just, have a lunch and learn, watch it with them. He or she can write it off and pay for it because he or she to have 10 people watching the event. So thanks a lot, guys. As always, it's always fun.
Thank you.
And I look forward to the next time.
Awesome.
Very good. That's good. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.